This is Town Square Sunday on demand. And now, 1420 WBSM's Jim Phillips.
Good morning. I'm your host, Jim Phillips, and this is Town Square Sunday. This program airs every Sunday morning and highlights individuals and organizations seeking to make the South Coast a better place to live and work. Today, we are talking to two members of the New Bedford Economic Development Council. They are part of a committee, the EDC's Regeneration Committee, that has put together a report on housing issues in New Bedford. The report is entitled Housing for All, Forward-Looking Strategies for a Growing New Bedford. It is an extensive report. We won't be able to cover it all today, but I did want to touch on some high points with the EDC Vice Chair, Tony Sapienza, and Paul Chasse of the Realtors Association of Southeastern Massachusetts. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
You are both members of the Regeneration Committee or working closely with that committee. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
All right. One of the conclusions of the report is that Greater New Bedford now must build 8,700 new housing units by 2013 to really get a handle on the region's housing market. Is that an impossible number? Tony, why don't you start?
Well, by 2030, we're going to see population growth, and we clearly have a shortage. We haven't been building housing for the last 10 years to meet the population growth that we've had in the city. The report makes it really clear that there are 3,000 new families and only 1,000 new dwelling units. So, that's 2,000 folks who are looking. So when people complain about rents going up, it's because basic supply and demand, okay? You need to increase the supply. So do we think we can build that many? Probably not, but do we want to try to? Absolutely. We need housing at every price point. Affordable housing, worker housing, family housing, luxury housing, you name it, all of it is in demand in the city of New Bedford and to a certain extent in the suburbs as well.
Yeah. Paul, you're a realtor by trade. You've kind of seen this on the ground level, haven't you?
Sure, we've been talking about this for a long time. Inventory has been very, very difficult over the last few years, but it's something that has been coming around for a decade. Ever since the 2008, 2010 collapse, it started to build back up, and demand has just outpaced inventory.
I'm always concerned about these lower income folks because it doesn't seem to be enough housing for them. These are the folks that are working paycheck to paycheck to some degree.
Yeah.
They are not making a great deal of money. They're looking for low-cost housing. And I suppose you can find that in New Bedford, but not a lot. You're closer to this than I am. Is there a lot of low-cost housing available in New Bedford?
Well, I think there's a need for more. But like Tony said, too, I think part of the problem is that we need inventory on all levels. And like the housing market, and we often use this example of you go into a starter home and that family will eventually move up and, they'll get their next home and that family is either going to a larger home or that larger home, they're retiring and moving downward. The same thing works with apartment rentals, right? So multifamilies, there's not enough inventory in and around New Bedford. So what happens is we have probably, I can't even count the dozens and dozens of first-time home buyers that are ready to move out of apartments to purchase homes, but can't because we don't have the inventory. And that leaves those apartments still stuck with people in them versus other people that could get in under affordability.
You would seem to think, gentlemen, that developers would be flocking to New Bedford, build housing. After all, the costs are cheaper here, I think. You don't know about construction costs these days, but the cost would be, I think, a little cheaper here. There's a demand here. Why aren't we seeing people flocking in? Now, I want to clarify my statement by saying there are some developments going up in New Bedford right now. You may not notice them. Some are downtown, some are elsewhere. But the fact is there are some developments going up right now. Now, are there 8,700 units going up? No. But there are some developments going up now. But why aren't more developers flocking to New Bedford, Tony?
Quite frankly, the developers are not flocking because the developments that they are interested in pursuing just don't pencil. They don't work out. In spite of the fact that we've seen an increase of rent over particularly the last 5 years, a significant increase of rent, and the report makes it very clear just how significant that has been, we are still a relatively low-cost housing market, and the construction costs, unfortunately, have skyrocketed. Interest costs have skyrocketed because of the Fed's war on inflation. And so you look, there is actually a gap in terms of how to finance a housing development of $300,000 per unit that you want to construct. How do you make up that gap? Because it's made up of the interest costs, the construction cost. To a certain extent, the land acquisition costs in New Bedford are, pretty okay. That's the reality. It's certainly not the Boston market where land is really at a premium. But nonetheless, it's very difficult to finance a housing project in New Bedford because of the high construction costs and the fact that you just can't get $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month for rent, which is what you would need because this population doesn't support that kind of rent. We're not that rich a community yet.
Average rent, Paul, in New Bedford, $1,600, thereabouts?
Yeah, around $1,500, depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah. And family, larger apartments?
Oh, those can run almost $2,000 now. But like Tony said, it's still one of the most affordable areas in the state.
Gateway City? In the Gateway City.
In the Gateway City, sure.
Yeah. And we have seen projects that do pencil, but they've been projects where the building existed. It was a former mill. So you got the structure. You have to renovate it, but you needed historic tax credits or other kinds of tax credits in order to make the project work. And we just need more of that kind of creative thinking by developers, by state government, by the local government. And quite frankly, those are some of the things that the mayor has articulated in the plan that he released last March. We've just got to get all of those things to start to work together to build the housing that we need.
I know the EDC is working on a project to bring those people together. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. You are listening to Town Square Sunday. I'm Jim Phillips. My guests are Tony Sapienza and Paul Chasse, members of the Economic Development Council's Regeneration Committee. We're talking about the committee's recent report on housing. It seems to me there has to be more housing construction in the surrounding towns. Now, look, I get it. These towns are conservative. They're watching how many kids come into their town because of schools and all of that. So I get it. I understand why towns are a little reluctant to welcome this new construction with open arms. But they're not doing enough, in my humble opinion. Do you guys agree? Tony, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim. I think that there's a suburban kind of attitude where everybody needs 3 bedrooms, a breezeway, and a 2-stall garage, and the zoning in the towns, kind of reflects that desire. If the towns were able to loosen up the zoning a little bit so you could build more condominiums, where you could build more side by side, still attractive, still beautiful kinds of properties, it seems to me you would be able to create more housing in the towns that wouldn't change the character of the town, wouldn't necessarily add, hundreds of kids to the school system, which I guess is what some people get worried about because obviously education is very expensive. But nonetheless, there are opportunities to build those smaller kinds of 3 and 6 unit buildings that would really benefit the region as a whole.
Paul, what's your thought on surrounding towns doing more?
Right. So I will say that I've seen over the last couple of years some desire from some of these townsfolks to start to make a change. I think part of that is because we're having conversations that, not only is the urban city, not only is New Bedford going to have a difficult time keeping their families in the area, but we're starting to see the same problem with the suburbs, and once it starts affecting families in the suburbs, the attitude's going to change a bit about, hey, we've got to do something too in order to keep our family here. We're seeing it with businesses. The workforce is having a hard time finding employees, and that's not just because of New Bedford. That's because of the surrounding areas. And these business owners work. I mean, they live in suburbs. They don't necessarily live in New Bedford. So I think there is this wave starting to happen, including some of our legislative folks, that we have to look at this more seriously in the suburbs, and we're willing to do so.
Okay. Your report also suggests that it's a myth that the train is driving up rents and cost of housing in New Bedford. Most people think that, oh, here comes the train. That means we're going to be paying more for housing, whether it's rents or mortgages or whatever. What about that? I mean, is the train, is that, you called it a myth.
I call it a myth because, first of all, the train's not here yet, okay? So if you're speculating that the train is going to make this huge change in the urban commuting patterns and that you're going to benefit by it, it hasn't happened yet, number one. Number two, the reality is that the problem of rising rents is strictly supply and demand. And that's a concept that's really hard to communicate to people. It's easy to look at a train station and say, oh yeah, let's blame the train station. But when I sit down and talk to somebody about supply and demand, they may not understand what I'm even talking about, because it's a concept, but it's a reality of the economic situation that the city is in. There's not enough housing. Look, when there's not enough housing, the price goes up. See it at the gas station. You saw it this past few years at the gas station. Sure. It's not any different with housing.
Also, another myth, there's no land to build more housing in New Bedford. Well, that isn't quite so, is it, Paul?
No, I mean, we obviously don't have a ton of open land available, but there are a lot of opportunities within the city of New Bedford, whether it be blighted areas or, houses that are unoccupied, commercial spaces that are no longer being used. Those can be converted. We talk about mills, and we talk about the opportunities there. There are a couple of mills with, almost 1 million square feet of space in there. So there are opportunities for not so much vacant land, but there is land maybe with buildings that could be turned into something, or demolished and rebuilt. And then we talk about land, but we also don't talk about the air above it. So we also have to look at opportunities like building a little higher up. Instead of 3 floors, maybe we go 4 or 5 floors. There has been a lot of talk about that too, and I think that's a good way to look at another area to build.
Well, we mentioned there's been a lot of talk about things. There's going to be more talk about this issue. You guys are planning to hold a regional housing summit this spring. Tony, can you tell us about that? When and where, first off?
Well, the housing symposium is going to be at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. It's on April the 30th from 8 in the morning to around noontime. And we've asked Secretary of Housing, Ed Augustus, to come down and lead with a keynote speak, and then have a panel of developers, real estate folks, and suburban and some political or civic leaders, okay, to talk about how we can do more. How can we activate the community? How can we all work together to implement some of the ideas that are in both the mayor's report as well as in our Housing for All study?
And so you'll be bringing a lot of folks together. Is it worthwhile for, first of all, the developers going to be invited?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. We absolutely want developers to be there. We want them to understand that this is a community that is committed to, in fact, expanding its housing stock, because we all recognize that we need to. And what are the obstacles that they face? How can we reduce those obstacles so that developers have a better opportunity to build the housing that we need?
That is an important step, certainly, the Regional Housing Symposium. Again, April 30th at the Whaling Museum. I'm sure you're looking for some collaboration. You're looking for people to step up and say, we can do this. We can do this. We can make this happen. My company can do this. My agency can do this. So you're looking for people to step up.
Sure.
Is that it, Paul?
Different people, different situations, different opportunities. There's no one silver bullet for this. This is going to take a lot of people and a lot of different scenarios to tackle this type of problem. Like I said before, it's not something that happened overnight, and it's certainly not something that's going to get solved in a day. But we have confidence that we can really, put a dent in those numbers as we move forward.
And it's really important to note that as much as government, state and local government are supportive of these efforts, it's not just government's job to build housing. Okay, we can get some support for government. There's lots of programs that we should be taking full advantage of that subsidize or help develop these projects. But in the final analysis, it also takes people, local residents, people who are interested. It takes the business community to say, yeah, we're willing to step up. We're willing to work together in order to build more housing.
My guests have been Tony Sapienza and Paul Chasse of the New Bedford Economic Development Council. We have just scratched the surface, really, of the EDC's recent housing study, but certainly, along with the mayor's housing plan made public earlier last spring, a pathway for resolving the housing crisis in New Bedford. So thank you both for coming in. Good luck with the symposium, and hopefully you see a lot of folks there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to be here.
Don't go away. Town Square Sunday will continue in just a moment.